Did you know that a movie once promised to offend absolutely everyone who watched it? That was its actual selling point. The Loved One arrived in 1965 with a tagline that dared audiences. The motion picture with something to offend everyone. And somehow it delivered on that wild promise. This dark comedy looked at death, funerals, Hollywood greed, and American vanity, all while making people laugh uncomfortably in their seats. The studio didn't know what to do with it. Critics scratched their heads, but behind the cameras, something truly strange and wonderful was happening. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about The Loved One. Number 20. The book that Hollywood thought was impossible to film. Evelyn Waugh wrote his short satirical novel in 1948 after visiting Los Angeles. He saw something strange in the city. He noticed how Americans dealt with death, or rather, how they tried to make death beautiful, glamorous, and comfortable. He visited the famous Forest Lawn Memorial Park and couldn't believe his eyes. The cemetery looked like a theme park. There were statues everywhere. Music played softly. Everything felt fake and polished, like death itself had been given a Hollywood makeover. Waugh went home to England and wrote a biting little book called The Loved One. It made fun of the American funeral industry. It laughed at Hollywood's shallow culture. It poked at everything Americans held dear. The book became a sensation among literary circles. People loved its dark wit and sharp observations. But Hollywood stayed far away from it. For nearly 17 years, studio executives read the book and said the same thing. This cannot be made into a movie. The subject matter was too dark. The humor was too mean. American audiences would never accept a comedy about death and embalming and fake cemeteries. It seemed destined to remain just a book forever. Then along came a British director named Tony Richardson. He had just won an Academy Award for Tom Jones. He had power and influence. He looked at this impossible book and said something different. He said, "This is exactly what I want to make." Sometimes the greatest films come from the projects everyone else was too scared to touch. Number 19. Two comedy giants wrote the screenplay together. When Tony Richardson decided to adapt The Loved One, he made a brilliant choice. He didn't hire just one screenwriter. He hired two of the sharpest, strangest minds in comedy writing. Their names were Terry Southern and Christopher Isherwood. Both men were famous for very different reasons, but together they created something unforgettable. Terry Southern had just helped write Dr. Strangelove with Stanley Kubrick. That film had shown the world that you could make people laugh about nuclear war. Southern understood dark comedy better than almost anyone alive. He knew how to find humor in places where humor shouldn't exist. Christopher Isherwood was a different kind of writer. He was known for his serious literary novels about Berlin in the 1930s. His work would later inspire the musical Cabaret. He brought sophistication and emotional depth to everything he touched. These two men sat down together and looked at Evelyn Waugh's slim novel. They realized they couldn't just adapt it page by page. The book was too short. It needed to grow. So they expanded the story. They added new characters. They made the satire even sharper. They turned their aim at Hollywood itself, adding scenes that mocked the movie industry's cruelty and absurdity. The studio worried these writers were too wild, too unpredictable. But Richardson trusted them completely. He let them work without interference. The result was a screenplay that cut deeper than the original book. It attacked American culture from every angle. What looked like a simple comedy was actually a razor blade wrapped in velvet. Number 18. Jonathan Winters played two completely different characters. When casting began, the filmmakers faced a tricky problem. The story featured two brothers who ran competing funeral businesses. One brother owned the prestigious Whispering Glade Cemetery for humans. The other brother ran the Happier Hunting Ground, a cheaper cemetery for pets. The brothers were supposed to look alike but act completely differently. Someone had a wild idea. What if one actor played both roles? And what if that actor was Jonathan Winters, the legendary comedian known for his incredible improvisation skills? Winters had never done anything quite like this before, but he loved challenges. As Wilbur Glenworthy, the human funeral director, Winters became smooth and oily. He spoke in hushed, reverent tones. He treated death like a beautiful business opportunity. He wore expensive suits and smiled constantly, even when discussing corpses. As Henry Glenworthy, the pet cemetery owner, Winters transformed completely. This brother was rougher, more honest, less polished. He didn't pretend death was pretty. He just buried animals and collected money. Watching Winters switch between these two characters was like watching magic. He changed his voice, his posture, his entire personality. Some audience members didn't even realize it was the same actor until they saw the credits. The comedian who made people laugh with his wild improvisations proved he could also disappear into serious character work. Two brothers, one actor, infinite talent. Number 17. Rod Steiger, prepared for his role in disturbing ways. Rod Steiger was one of the most dedicated method actors in Hollywood. He didn't just memorize lines, he became his characters completely. For The Loved One, he played Mr. Joyboy, a creepy embalmer who works at Whispering Glades and falls obsessively in love with a female cosmetician. To prepare for this disturbing role, Steiger did something that would make most people run away screaming. He visited real mortuaries. He watched real embalmers at work. He studied how they touched the bodies, how they applied makeup to the deceased, how they positioned limbs and styled hair. He wanted to understand every detail of this strange profession. Steiger also studied the psychology of people who work with death every day. He wondered what kind of person would choose this career. He thought about loneliness, about obsession, about finding love in unexpected places. He built an entire inner life for Mr. Joyboy that audiences would only glimpse in small moments. On set, Steiger stayed in character between takes. He kept that same soft, unsettling voice. He maintained that same inappropriate smile. Other actors found it difficult to be around him during filming. He was too convincing, too real. When audiences finally saw the film, Steiger's performance disturbed them deeply. He made Mr. Joyboy sympathetic and terrifying at the same time. You felt sorry for him. You also wanted to look away. That wasn't just acting. That was total transformation. Number 16. Liberace appeared as a casket salesman. In one of the film's most surprising cameos, the legendary entertainer Liberace showed up to play a casket salesman. This wasn't stunt casting, it was perfect casting. Liberace was known for his flashy piano performances, his glittering costumes, and his over-the-top personality. Who better to sell fancy coffins? In his scene, Liberace demonstrates various casket options with the same enthusiasm he brought to his stage shows. He shows off the luxurious fabrics. He points out the comfortable padding. He treats each coffin like a work of art, a final resting place worthy of royalty. His performance was completely serious, which made it even funnier. Liberace understood exactly what the filmmakers wanted. He didn't wink at the camera. He didn't let audiences know he was in on the joke. He played the salesman as if selling expensive coffins was the most important job in the world. His sincerity made the satire sharper. Behind the scenes, Liberace was delightful to work with. He arrived on set in his usual extravagant style. He chatted with everyone. He played piano between takes, entertaining the crew. But when the cameras rolled, he became completely professional. His cameo lasted only a few minutes, but people remembered it for years. A famous entertainer selling death with a smile. Hollywood glamour meeting its final curtain. Sometimes the smallest roles leave the biggest impressions. Number 15. The film was shot entirely in black and white on purpose. By 1965, most major Hollywood productions had switched to color. Audiences expected bright, vibrant images. Color represented modernity, progress, and entertainment value. Black and white seemed old-fashioned. Tony Richardson made a deliberate choice. He wanted the loved one shot in black and white. The studio pushed back. They worried audiences would think the film was outdated. They feared poor box office returns. Color sold tickets. Black and white did not. Richardson argued his case passionately. He explained that black and white would give the film a documentary feeling. It would make the satire feel sharper, colder, more real. The contrast between light and shadow would emphasize the contrast between life and death that ran through every scene. The cinematographer, Haskell Wexler, supported Richardson completely. Wexler was a master of black and white photography. He knew how to use shadows to create mood. He knew how to make faces look haunting, how to make ordinary spaces feel strange and dreamlike. When filming began, Wexler created images that color could never match. The funeral parlors looked eerie. The cemetery landscapes looked like something from a nightmare. The Hollywood parties looked hollow and desperate. Every frame told viewers that something was deeply wrong beneath the surface beauty. Richardson was right all along. The black and white wasn't a limitation, it was a weapon. What looked like an old technique was actually a bold artistic choice. Number 14. Real funeral industry experts. Visited the set to make the mortuary scenes authentic. The production hired consultants from actual funeral homes. These experts came to the set and demonstrated proper embalming techniques. They showed how to position bodies. They explained the chemicals used in preservation. They discussed the business side of death. Some crew members couldn't handle these visits. They felt sick watching the demonstrations. They stepped outside for fresh air. Others became fascinated. They asked questions they never thought they'd ask about what happens to bodies after death. The actors paid close attention. Rod Steiger took detailed notes. He watched how the experts moved their hands, how they treated the deceased with a strange mixture of professionalism and detachment. He incorporated these observations into his performance. The production designer used the consultant's knowledge to build accurate sets. The embalming room looked exactly like a real mortuary. The equipment was correct. The lighting matched what professionals actually used. Nothing was fake or Hollywoodized. These experts also shared stories about their careers. Some tales were sad. Some were surprisingly funny. The dark humor they developed to cope with their work directly influenced the screenplay. Real life provided material stranger than anything fiction could invent. What looked like movie magic was actually careful research meeting artistic vision. Number 13. The Whispering Glades Cemetery was based on a real place. Evelyn Waugh didn't invent Whispering Glades from his imagination. He based it directly on Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. This real cemetery was famous for its unusual approach to death. Instead of traditional graveyards with simple headstones, Forest Lawn featured elaborate gardens, classical statues, and recreations of famous churches. The founder of Forest Lawn wanted to change how Americans thought about death. He believed cemeteries should be beautiful, uplifting, and even romantic. He banned traditional cemetery elements like raised headstones and mournful statuary. Everything had to be cheerful and inspiring. When the filmmakers needed locations for the loved one, they couldn't film at Forest Lawn itself. The cemetery's owners wanted nothing to do with a movie that mocked their business model. So the production team found other locations around Los Angeles that could stand in for the famous Memorial Park. They filmed at various gardens, estates, and parks throughout Southern California. Set decorators added fake statues and memorial plaques. They created the feeling of Forest Lawn without ever stepping foot on its grounds. Ironically, the publicity from the film made more people curious about Forest Lawn. Visitors increased after the movie's release. People wanted to see the real place that inspired such savage satire. A film meant to mock the cemetery accidentally became free advertising. Reality and fiction danced a strange dance together. Number 12. Robert Morse was chosen because he could play innocent. The lead role of Dennis Barlow required someone special. Dennis is a young English poet who comes to Hollywood and ends up working at a pet cemetery. He's our guide through this strange world of death and commerce. He needed to seem innocent, out of place, and slightly bewildered by everything he sees. Robert Morse had just conquered Broadway in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. He had a boyish face and charming energy. He could seem naive while actually being quite sharp. Directors loved working with him because he took direction well and brought unexpected ideas to every scene. Tony Richardson saw something important in Morse. He saw someone who could witness the absurdity of American funeral culture with fresh, wondering eyes. Dennis Barlow isn't a hero. He isn't even particularly moral. But through his outsider perspective, audiences could see how strange everything really was. Morse prepared for the role by studying British accents and mannerisms. He wanted Dennis to feel authentically English, even though Morse himself was thoroughly American. He worked with dialect coaches. He watched British films. He practiced until the accent felt natural. On set, Morse served as an anchor amid the wild performances around him. While other actors went big and theatrical, he stayed grounded. His quietness made their loudness funnier. His confusion made their confidence seem ridiculous. What looked like underacting was actually careful calibration. Number 11. The film's editor later became a legendary director. A young editor named Hal Ashby worked on The Loved One. His job was to take all the footage and shape it into a coherent story. He sat in dark editing rooms for months, cutting and arranging scenes until they flowed properly. Ashby was brilliant at his work. He understood rhythm and pacing. He knew when a scene needed to breathe and when it needed to move faster. He could find the best moments in hours of footage and string them together like pearls on a necklace. Working on The Loved One taught Ashby about dark comedy. He learned how long to hold on uncomfortable moments. He discovered that timing could make the difference between funny and disturbing. These lessons would serve him well in his future career. A few years later, Ashby started directing his own films. He made Harold and Maude, a dark comedy about death and unlikely love. He made Shampoo, Coming Home, and Being There. He became one of the most respected directors of the 1970s. Critics would later notice connections between The Loved One and Ashby's directorial work. Both shared a willingness to find humor in dark places. Both treated death as something to examine rather than fear. The editor had been learning from the material he shaped. What looked like a job was actually a masterclass. Number 10. Milton Berle mocked his own industry. Milton Berle was a television legend. He was called Mr. Television because his variety show had helped sell millions of TV sets in the early 1950s. He was one of the most famous entertainers in America. He had power, influence, and respect. In The Loved One, Berle played a cruel Hollywood studio executive who fires his own brother and drives him to suicide. The character was heartless, selfish, and completely believable. Berle wasn't playing a villain from imagination. He was playing people he knew from real life. Berle understood Hollywood's dark side better than most. He had watched friends rise and fall. He had seen careers destroyed by heartless decisions. He knew how quickly the industry could turn on someone. This knowledge fueled his performance. Some Hollywood insiders felt uncomfortable watching Berle's scenes. They recognized the type. They had worked for people like this. They had maybe become people like this. The satire hit too close to home. Berle gave interviews where he discussed why he took the role. He said Hollywood deserved to be mocked. He said too many people suffered under cruel bosses who valued money over human beings. His willingness to criticize his own industry gave the film credibility. This wasn't an outsider attacking Hollywood. This was an insider confessing sins. Number 9. The production designer created a world of beautiful, grotesque. Production designer Ruben Ter Arutunian faced an impossible task. He needed to create spaces that looked beautiful and disturbing at the same time. The funeral parlors needed to feel welcoming and creepy. The cemetery needed to seem peaceful and somehow wrong. Everything required this delicate balance. Ter Arutunian studied real Los Angeles architecture. He noticed how the city mixed genuine beauty with tacky fakeness. A beautiful Spanish colonial building might sit next to a neon-lit hamburger stand. Classical statues stood in shopping center parking lots. The city had no consistent style, no coherent vision. For The Loved One, Ter Arutunian amplified this aesthetic chaos. He designed sets that combined elegant furniture with garish decorations. He mixed expensive materials with cheap imitations. Every room told a story about people trying desperately to seem classier than they were. The Whispering Glades sets were his masterpiece. He created a funeral parlor that looked like a European palace designed by someone who had never actually been to Europe. Gold trim everywhere, velvet curtains, marble floors that were obviously fake. The effect was overwhelming and slightly nauseating. Crew members who worked on those sets later said they felt uncomfortable even when the cameras weren't rolling. The spaces just felt wrong, even though nothing was overtly threatening. Good design can create emotions without words. What looked like decoration was actually storytelling. Number 8. Anjanette Comer played the most difficult role. Aimee Thanatogenos is one of the strangest characters in film history. She's a cosmetician at Whispering Glades who applies makeup to dead bodies. She's beautiful, naive, and completely devoted to her work. She becomes caught in a love triangle between Dennis Barlow and the creepy Mr. Joyboy. Her fate is tragic. Anjanette Comer won this challenging role after an extensive search. The filmmakers needed someone who could seem both innocent and unsettling. They needed someone beautiful, but also strange. Comer fit perfectly. Preparing for the role pushed Comer to her limits. She had to understand a woman who found beauty in death, who applied lipstick to corpses with genuine artistic pride. She had to make audiences feel sympathy for someone whose job most people found repulsive. Comer visited real mortuaries, just as Steiger had. She watched cosmeticians at work. She noticed how they talked to the deceased as if the dead could hear. She incorporated these details into her performance. When Aimee applies makeup in the film, she works with real tenderness and care. The emotional demands of the role affected Comer during production. She found it difficult to shake Aimee's sadness after shooting Wrapped each day. The character's tragic arc weighed on her. Some roles stay with actors longer than others. What looked like performance was becoming something more personal. Number 7. Several scenes were cut to avoid an adults-only rating. The original cut of The Loved One was even darker and more shocking than what audiences eventually saw. Tony Richardson had filmed scenes that pushed boundaries far beyond what 1965 audiences would accept. The studio panicked when they saw the first edit. One extended sequence showed the embalming process in graphic detail. Richardson had filmed close-ups of bodies being prepared. The images were accurate, but disturbing. Test audiences reacted badly. Some people left the theater. The scene was trimmed significantly. Another cut sequence involved a more explicit romantic encounter. The filmmakers had shot footage that suggested more than the final film showed. This material was removed entirely to avoid rating problems. A third deleted scene expanded the suicide sequence, showing more of its aftermath. Richardson wanted audiences to feel the weight of this tragedy, but the studio worried it was too much. They cut it down to brief, suggestive moments. These editing battles frustrated Richardson. He felt the studio was watering down his vision. He argued that the darkness served the satire. How could you mock the funeral industry without showing what they actually did? The studio disagreed. Commerce won over art, as it often does in Hollywood. What looked like a complete film was actually a compromise. Number 6. The film features one of cinema's strangest endings. Without revealing too much for viewers who haven't seen the film, The Loved One concludes with one of the most bizarre sequences in 1960s cinema. The ending involves a rocket ship, a scheme to dispose of evidence, and a satirical comment on American ambition reaching literally for the stars. Tony Richardson wanted an ending that matched the film's escalating absurdity. He felt a conventional conclusion would betray everything that came before. The audience had watched crazy things happen for nearly 2 hours. The finale needed to be crazier than everything else combined. The ending sequence required special effects that were expensive for the time. The production built models and created optical effects. They filmed actors against blue screens, which was still a relatively new technique. Everything had to come together perfectly. Some studio executives hated the ending when they first saw it. They worried audiences would be confused. They suggested alternatives that wrapped things up more neatly. Richardson refused to change his vision. He said the messy, strange ending was the whole point. Critics remained divided about this choice for years. Some called it brilliant satire, others called it self-indulgent nonsense. But everyone remembered it. Love it or hate it, you couldn't forget that ending. What looked like chaos was actually careful planning toward maximum impact. Number 5. Terry Southern worked on the script during his most creative period. When Terry Southern accepted the job of adapting The Loved One, he was at the absolute peak of his powers. He had just finished Dr. Strangelove with Stanley Kubrick. He was about to write the screenplay for The Cincinnati Kid. He was also developing ideas that would become Easy Rider. His mind was producing brilliant, subversive work at an incredible rate. Southern brought something special to The Loved One. He understood how to attack sacred cows without being preachy. He knew that satire worked best when it made you laugh before it made you think. He could write dialogue that sounded natural while carrying devastating criticism underneath. Working with Christopher Isherwood pushed Southern in new directions. Isherwood was more literary, more careful with language. Southern was more wild, more willing to take risks. Together they balanced each other out. Isherwood polished Southern's raw energy. Southern loosened Isherwood's formal tendencies. The two writers reportedly had long conversations about American culture during their collaboration. They discussed consumerism, conformity, and the fear of death. These philosophical discussions found their way into the screenplay. Characters would say things that seemed simple but carried deep meaning. Southern later called The Loved One one of his proudest achievements. He felt the film captured something true about America that most movies were too scared to touch. What looked like entertainment was actually social criticism wearing a funny mask. Number 4. The studio had no idea how to market the film. When The Loved One was completed, MGM faced a serious problem. How do you advertise a dark comedy about death to general audiences? Every marketing approach seemed wrong. Make it look too funny and people would be shocked by the darkness. Make it look too dark and nobody would buy tickets. Marketing executives tried various approaches. They created posters emphasizing the star power. They wrote taglines that hinted at the scandal without revealing too much. They screened the film for focus groups and watched confused reactions. The final marketing campaign leaned into the controversy. The motion picture with something to offend everyone became the main tagline. This was honest advertising. It warned people what they were getting into. It also attracted curious viewers who wanted to be offended. Different advertisements targeted different audiences. Some posters emphasized the British literary pedigree. Others highlighted the Hollywood satire angle. Still others focused on the romantic subplot. The campaign felt scattered because nobody could agree on what the movie actually was. Opening weekend results were disappointing. The film didn't find a mass audience, but it developed a devoted following over time. College students discovered it. Art house theaters revived it. The movie that nobody knew how to sell eventually found its people anyway. What looked like failure was actually a slow-burning success. Number 3. Multiple famous actors took small roles just to be part of it. The Loved One attracted big names who agreed to appear in tiny roles. They didn't need the money, they didn't need the exposure, they just wanted to participate in something unusual and daring. James Coburn appears briefly as an immigration officer. At this point in his career, Coburn was becoming a genuine movie star. He could have demanded better roles. Instead, he showed up for a few days of work on this strange project. Tab Hunter plays a guide at Whispering Glades. Hunter had been a major heartthrob in the 1950s. By 1965, his career had cooled somewhat. He took this satirical role as a way of poking fun at his own pretty boy image. Roddy McDowall appears as a Hollywood insider. McDowall was a former child star who had successfully transitioned to adult roles. He understood Hollywood's dark side from personal experience. His casting added layers of meaning to his scenes. These actors gathered on set and traded stories about their various encounters with the funeral industry. Everyone, it turned out, had strange tales about Hollywood funerals they had attended. These real-life experiences added authenticity to their performances. What looked like cameos was actually a gathering of witnesses testifying against their own industry. Number 2. The film predicted future. Trends in the funeral industry. Watching The Loved One today feels strangely prophetic. The film mocked trends that had barely begun in 1965 but would explode in the decades that followed. The movie shows funeral homes competing through luxury and spectacle. Today, this is common practice. Modern funeral homes offer everything from video tributes to themed caskets to elaborate memorial services. What seemed like exaggeration has become reality. The pet cemetery in the film seemed absurd to 1965 audiences. A business dedicated to burying animals? Who would pay for that? Today, pet funeral services generate billions of dollars annually. People hold memorial services for their dogs and cats. They buy custom urns and grave markers. The Happier Hunting Ground predicted a massive industry. The film also anticipated the corporatization of death. In the movie, funeral homes are businesses first and comforters second. Today, large corporations own chains of funeral homes across the country. The personal family-run mortuary has largely disappeared. Profit margins matter more than grief counseling. Critics who dismissed The Loved One as too cynical in 1965 would recognize our current world instantly. The satire didn't exaggerate enough. Reality caught up and surpassed the fiction. What looked like dark imagination was actually clear-eyed prediction. Chamba 4. Number 1. The film almost destroyed. Tony Richardson's Hollywood career. Tony Richardson had won the Academy Award for Best Director just 2 years before making The Loved One. He was considered a brilliant talent, a British artist bringing fresh perspectives to American cinema. Studios offered him whatever projects he wanted. Then The Loved One flopped. Critics were mixed. Audiences stayed away. The studio lost money. Suddenly, Richardson's reputation changed. People whispered that he was too European, too intellectual, too willing to alienate audiences. Richardson found it harder to get his next projects funded. Studio executives who had courted him now returned phone calls more slowly. The doors that had opened so wide after Tom Jones began closing one by one. This experience embittered Richardson toward Hollywood. He had made a film he believed in. He had created something original and challenging. His reward was professional punishment. The system didn't want artists who pushed boundaries. It wanted reliable craftsmen who delivered safe products. Richardson continued making films, but his American career never fully recovered. He returned to Britain more often. He worked in theater. He found other outlets for his creativity. The filmmaker, who had seemed destined for Hollywood greatness, became a cautionary tale about the cost of ambition. Yet history would vindicate Richardson. The Loved One gained appreciation over the decades. Critics reevaluated it. New generations discovered it. The film that nearly ended his career became recognized as ahead of its time. What looked like a disaster was actually a masterpiece waiting to be understood. Bonus fact: the lost documentary footage. During production, Tony Richardson hired a documentary crew to capture behind-the-scenes footage. He wanted to preserve how this unusual film came together. The crew shot hours of material showing actors preparing, sets being built, and creative discussions unfolding. This documentary was intended to be released alongside the main film. It would show audiences the thought and care that went into the satire. It would prove that the filmmakers weren't being cruel. They were being truthful. But when The Loved One underperformed, the studio lost interest in the documentary. Why promote a failure? The footage was shelved. It was moved from vault to vault over the years. Some of it was reportedly damaged. Some may have been lost entirely. Film historians have searched for this material for decades. A few fragments have surfaced in archives. Brief clips have appeared in retrospective documentaries. But the complete behind-the-scenes record remains missing. If this footage still exists somewhere, it would reveal secrets about one of the strangest productions of the 1960s. We would see how Rod Steiger transformed into Mr. Joyboy. We would watch Terry Southern and Christopher Isherwood debating dialogue choices. We would understand how genius and madness mixed together on that set. Maybe someday the lost reels will be found. Maybe future generations will finally see what happened behind those cameras. Until then, we can only imagine. The past lives in fragments, waiting for discovery. Old film, new mysteries. The Loved One is not an easy film to love. It asks audiences to laugh at death, to mock grief, to question how we handle our deepest fears. It shows us a mirror and dares us to recognize ourselves. But beneath the satire lies something profound. The film asks why we spend so much money making death beautiful. It wonders why we can't face mortality honestly. It challenges our need to pretend that everything is fine when nothing is fine at all. The actors gave everything to these strange roles. The writers crafted words that cut deep. The director risked his career for his vision. Together, they created something that audiences in 1965 weren't ready for, but that we need now more than ever. Movies like The Loved One remind us that cinema can be dangerous, uncomfortable, and important. Not every film should make us feel good. Some should make us think harder about lives we're living. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.